Revelations chapter 8. Revelations chapter 8. Last time we was here, which has been a couple of weeks ago now, but I guess you went over chapter 7. That was a night I missed. Chapter 8 is a fairly short chapter. There's not many here tonight, but I know the cold and the weather would keep some out, but that's okay. We'll study and get into this a little bit. We know we've studied already the opening of the seals. Some of them, Hebrews chapter 8 is not going to do me any good, is it? I don't know why I'm over there. We've been studying the opening of the seals. We went through the first 6. And we've also tied them back to Matthew chapter 24. And some of this today will continue over in Matthew 24. Because we're going to start with the opening of the 7th seal. And if you go back and look, and I'll read it here out of Matthew. I think that I have it marked. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 21 and 22 says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not seen or has not since the beginning of the world to this time. No, not even shall be. And except those days shall be shortened, there shall be no flesh to be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." Now, if you take a look at the seals, and we'll study the opening here of the 8th, and it says, "And when he had opened," the 7th seal, "there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour." Now, there's, of course, a joke going around. Y'all probably already know the joke that it says that men get to heaven a half hour before women because there's silence in it in the span of half an hour. But that's not what that, of course, means. I've read a couple of different places and different things, preparing for this. Actually, I didn't start preparing for this until this evening. So a lot of the stuff that I normally would prepare, I didn't read all the way through or do what I normally would get done. But one of them was saying that the sign, that heaven, there was all of those around the throne, and they were constantly praising God and singing. And to him, they believed that for the span of a half an hour, that silence from what they're seeing was probably ceased in reverence of what was about to be poured out upon the earth. A reverence of silence what was done. Maybe it was for those that was seeking vengeance, or seeking not so much vengeance, but wanted to be their prayers heard. Maybe that's what the silence was done. There's a lot of different theories behind it. Nobody really knows, of course, because this is something that's going to happen in the future and probably pretty soon. But there was silence there, and I can imagine being a reverence before he pours out his last plagues upon the earth. And John continues to write in the 2nd verse. It says, "And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them that were given 7 trumpets." So there is 7 trumpets that is given out over the next couple of chapters, and we can read those and go through those here one at a time. He says, "And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer," that is what they used to burn the incense with, "and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the altar, golden altar, which was before the throne." Now, in the Old Testament, a lot of times the incense or the smoke that was given would represent the prayers of the saints. They went to the altar a lot of times with their sacrifice that was given. They would sacrifice it. One of the priest that was there. And then they would give a burnt offering, which would be the smoke that would go up to God, and it would be to cover the sins or whatever it was they were for purification or whatever the ritual or whatever that they were given the sacrifice for. So it represented a lot of times of the prayers or the forgiveness of sin or whatever. So here we see this one, the having a lot of the. And you can read back with the 144,000 and all that stuff that you covered in the last one, and in the cries of some of the other ones that was given of the great multitude that cried and wondered how long would it be before they would be vindicated, so we can see that all this all could be a possibility of what this represented. And he says, and the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And this could also be happening in that span of a half an hour of silence. As one of the commentators that I read stated that it's a possibility that the reverence was given so that the prayers of these saints could be given before God and before the throne. So we can see this smoke that was coming up and representing it. But it says, and then the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar. Now this is the altar of God. And cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So we could see that this prayer that was lifted up, this could be the vindication of those saints that had been martyred or had been killed or whatever for God's sake. And this smoke and the fire that they took and cast it into the earth represents the final plagues, the final judgment to be given to the earth. So as we see these, when we read these, it comes out and it says, and the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared them to sound. Now, when a trumpet was sounded in the Old Testament, it was used for an assembly purpose, either an assembly before God or an assembling of the people together, or it could be used as a battle cry. For either a time for the battle to start or a time for it to retreat. It was used for a lot of because the trumpet can be heard a long ways. Some people says I can be heard a long way, so maybe I don't need a trumpet, but for the purposes of ceremonies and assemblies, trumpets were used. So we could hear this first angel. And it says, the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire and mingled with blood. And they were casted to the earth, and the third part of trees were burned up, and all green grasses were burned up. Now, if you go back and look, and we can see back when the plagues, and we could study the plagues that came upon Egypt, we could see a lot of similarities of these plagues as being the same type of plagues that come upon Egypt. We remembered the blood here as it talked about of coming down to earth, and it was cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees. So the first trumpet burned up 1/3 of the plants in the trees. Now, can you imagine that happening? What that would have in the commerce of things, the food production, all the things that goes into that. Maybe the oxygen of that area was no good, and the trees and stuff couldn't work. But the plants and the trees folks, we need plants and we need trees to live. It takes the carbon dioxide that's in the air, the tree filters that out to refresh the oxygen. The plants we live on to eat for us. So we can imagine the devastation that this would have upon the earth. It said, and the second angel sounded, as it was a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And a third of the part of the sea became blood. And a third part of the creatures which were in the seas and had life died. And a third part of the ships were destroyed. So we have a third of the plants and the trees that was burned up. Now we have a third part of the sea becoming blood. Now, of course, being blood in the parts of the air, the animals that was all died because they can't remember the plague was when the rivers of the Nile was turned into blood. So we could see the similarities of that of happening in part of that plague. Folks, when you have a third part of everything of the sea becoming blood, there is a large part of our diet and things that comes from the sea. So you see the plant-based diet and the sea-based food that we being destroyed here, a third of it. You talk about having a shortage of food and a shortage of things around. Can you imagine what this would cause? It would be hard to even imagine. Now, we can read in history. I don't remember, of course, because I wasn't around then. And the people at that time, when they had the Great Depression that happened here in the United States, the Dust Bowl, they called it, of how it didn't rain and all the crops went bad and people lost their jobs and people went hungry. There was a great migration then that happened from different parts of the country to where there was food and possibility of jobs, and those places being overran by people. It's hard to imagine. But if that was to happen here and all of a sudden there was no rain and the land dried up and anything you planted wouldn't grow, to live, you'd probably have to leave. You go to a place that you would hope to have it. And when you got there, what would you find? There would be a lot of other people that had moved to the area. You know, it'd just be hard for us to imagine such a thing happening because of the abundance that we have here in our country. Steve talked about it last night of going to other countries and seeing the poor that other countries have and how they live. It would even be hard for us to think or imagine in our country, in our place here where we live, becoming such a desolate place. But the Bible says it can happen here. Verse 10, he says, and the third angel sounded, and there was a great star from heaven, burning as it was a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of the waters. And the name of the star was called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. So now we have a third part of the fresh water. Not just the sea, but the fresh water now becoming bad. Wormwood was what they said in this reading, that it was undrinkable water. It was wormwood, was a bitter herb that no one could eat or do anything with. So if the water became bitter and undrinkable, and so I can imagine that there would be a lot that would die of thirst. Oh, how this would happen. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so that as the third part of them were darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Oh my goodness, can you imagine what that would be like? Matthew here, if I can go back over to it, I got too many places marked in here of things I've been reading and studying. Matthew 24, and I believe verse 29 would go with that when it says, and immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Now see, that's Jesus talking about what's to happen. And here we see John see this in a vision of all of these things to happen. A third part of the plants and trees was to die. A third part of the sea shall become as blood. A third part of the fresh water shall be done away with. Not only, but a third part of the sea, but a third part of the ships shall be destroyed. A third part of the fresh water is bitter. And now it says a third part of the sun and the moon shall be darkened. It would be hard to imagine such a judgment that come upon the earth. I try to look and think of some of these signs that seems to be maybe even happening today. Do we see any of these things going on? And I think if we looked around, we see. But what I find interesting is the next part of it here. He says, and I beheld and heard an angel. Now, in some of the Jewish translation, the word angel here in this sense and in the part of the next chapter could also be translated into eagle. But it says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of the heavens, saying with a loud voice, woe, 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 to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of their angels, which are yet to be sound. So as bad as this is, 1/3 of everything being destroyed on the earth, the next 3 are even worse. There's more judgment to come upon the earth and the inhabitants thereof. So we'll take a little bit of maybe one more of these, and in chapter 9 he goes into says, and the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven into the earth. And it was given, let me go back and try that again. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven into the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Now, of all of the things that has happened so far, happened to the trees, it's happening to the salt water, the fresh water, it's happening to the creatures, it's happened to the seas, it's happened to all the fresh water. But now we see things, this judgment that's going to come up on those that are left. And he opened them. Now, having a key means that you have some power of some type. You have authority, I guess, over something. They just don't give the keys to anybody. You want to be careful who you give the keys to the church to, wouldn't you? You want to make sure that who gets them is the right person to have it. I was speaking with a friend of mine that I went that I took some classes with and got to know really well. He was pastored over in parts of the county, and he says that when he went to interview, when they always assign a pastor to a parish, that he went to interview with that. He thought he was there just to talk to him and see if he thought that would be a good fit for him. And he said that when he got ready to leave, they handed him the keys. He said, well, Pastor, you need these keys to the church. And so then they gave him the authority then to handle the matters of the church. And he said the very next service he had happened to be after the June flooding we had. That was so bad quite some time ago. And he said that made it pretty remarkable and rememberable of that happening. But it says then he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of the great furnace, and the sun and the air was darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. So apparently this is and they wonder, well, is there going to be hellfire? Where it sounds like not only in other places, but in this one, it's saying that there was a great fire in the pit, and this smoke came up out of it, and it was must be pretty smoky as well if there's going to be fire, and it darkened the air. But look here, it says, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. Now, locusts in the Old Testament meant that was something that was a plague. We can go back and remember the plague of Egypt, how the locusts came and it ate up all of the crops and it ate up all of the leaves and everything around. That's what a locust does. Of course, in that time, it only did it in Egypt. It did not touch the people of God where they were at. Now, this locust is a little bit different. It says, and it came out of the smoke, the locust, into the earth, and unto them was given power, as the locusts of the earth had power. And it was commanded that they should not hurt the grass of the earth. So this locust is not the locust that we would see today, because it was not to eat the grass, nor any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their forehead. Folks, if there is no other reason to accept Christ as your Savior, it is to escape the judgment that is coming to this world. This locust is come to destroy those that was not of God. In other words, the unbelievers is the ones that's going to be destroyed with this locust. And to them was given that they should not kill them, but they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So this locust is going to be attacking the people. It's not going to kill them, but for 5 months, can you imagine being stung by that of a scorpion? He says in verse 6, and in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, death shall flee from them. Can you imagine that? Let me look over here just a minute, what Matthew says. Matthew 24, verse 30 and 31. And then shall appear the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth murmur, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, and heaven with power and great glory. And then shall his angels with a great sound of trumpet, and they shall gather together the elect. Well, that's not what I wanted to read. I got the wrong verses down there on that somewhere. It talked about the one that, I'm looking for the one we talked about, that for the mountains, they prayed for the mountains to fall on them and they didn't. I know it's in there somewhere. I'm just not seeing it. So, but anyway, it says, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses preparing unto battle. And on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the face of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth was as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were strings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. Sounds like a pretty bad thing to have flying around, biting and stinging you. This judgment is upon those that did not believe, or the unbelievers.
Sounds like some of those things that has to do with them critters. You can't defend yourself against them because they have a breastplate of iron and teeth like a lion and stuff like that. I don't know about the hair of a woman. I don't understand it. I don't know what kind of danger it is.
Yeah, it does sound pretty something bad, isn't it?
Yeah. Like you couldn't say, well, I was shoot you or something like that. It's going to torment you either way.
Yeah, having a breastplate of iron means it sounds like you can't destroy it. It'd be pretty hard to get rid of it, to hurt them, to get them to leave you alone. But here's the part that I find interesting. And he says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. Our adversary was one of God's fallen angels, an angel of light. He said it was a beautiful thing, he was. And that he was kicked out of heaven because he thought him equal with God. So as we see here this happening, that there was an angel that was with them, and it sounds like it's probably that angel that they had there, whose name is in the Hebrew tongue Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue, which was his name was Apollyon. So one woe is past, and behold, there come 2 more woes hereafter. So I'm going to stop here. They're here for tonight, because like I said, as far as I got studied through. It's hard to imagining this happening, being poured out upon the earth, and the judgment that's coming. This judgment here in this first woe that we read comes from the bottomless pit, and it has to be done after the key of the earth, that it's open, and it sounds like the old adversary's loosened. So I don't know what you got out of that. I hope we got enough out of it that we may take it and read upon it, maybe study a little bit upon it, and we